My name is Elizabeth, and at 52, I thought I had seen every possible way a marriage could fall apart. Sitting in that lawyer's office holding divorce papers in my trembling hands, I felt like my entire world had crumbled beneath my feet. But nothing prepared me for discovering that my husband of 23 years was planning his second wedding while still married to me. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife, but what he didn't realize was that he had made one critical mistake that would destroy everything. Before I share this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories. Trust me, you won't believe what happened next. Richard and I met when we were both 23, young and full of dreams. We built what seemed like the perfect life together in the suburbs of Denver. Our two children, Sarah, who's now 21 and studying at Colorado State, and Michael, 19 and finishing his senior year of high school, were the center of our universe for so long. I worked my way up to Chief Financial Officer at Morrison Real Estate, a mid-sized company that specialized in commercial properties. Richard managed sales at Thompson Auto Group, selling luxury vehicles to Denver's affluent residents. While we both worked hard, my career in finance had always been more lucrative. I made roughly twice what Richard earned, but it never seemed to matter. We were a team, or so I thought. Our financial picture looked solid on paper. We owned a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial worth $480,000 in Highlands Ranch. 2 cars sat in our driveway, a practical Honda Accord for me, and a demonstration BMW that Richard got to drive through his dealership. Our savings account held $95,000 money we'd carefully accumulated over the years for the kids' college expenses and our eventual retirement. But the real foundation of our financial security was my investment portfolio. Through careful planning and my expertise in financial markets, I'd built a diversified collection of stocks, bonds, and mutual funds worth $340,000. When we'd married young and naive, I'd insisted on keeping our major financial decisions under my control. Call it intuition or professional caution, but I maintained primary ownership of our investment accounts, our savings, and even held the primary position on our house deed. Richard had always seemed content with this arrangement. He'd joke with friends that he was lucky to have married someone who could make their money grow while he focused on selling cars. Our weekly barbecues filled our backyard with laughter from neighbors and friends. Every summer, we pack up the kids and spend 2 weeks at Lake Tahoe, renting the same cabin by the water, where Sarah learned to water ski and Michael caught his first fish. Life felt predictable and safe. Soccer games on Saturday mornings, family dinners every Sunday, and the comfortable rhythm of a marriage that had weathered 2 decades of ups and downs. We'd survived the sleepless nights of newborns, the financial stress of buying our first home, and the chaos of raising teenagers. But somewhere around 6 months ago, subtle changes began creeping into our routine. Richard started working later, claiming that the dealership was pushing for higher sales numbers. He'd come home after 9 o'clock, sometimes 10, with stories about difficult customers and extended negotiations. The phone calls started 2 hushed conversations he'd take in the garage or basement, always with some explanation about work-related issues that couldn't wait until morning. Then there was his sudden interest in our financial situation. Richard had never paid much attention to the details of our investments or savings. He trusted me to handle it all and rarely asked questions beyond our monthly budget discussions. But recently, he'd been inquiring about our assets with a newfound curiosity that felt strange. He'd ask about moving some investments around for better tax benefits, or wonder out loud if we should put some accounts in his name for diversification purposes. Looking back, I can see how these changes painted a picture I wasn't ready to acknowledge. But at the time, I attributed his behavior to a midlife crisis or stress from work. After 23 years of marriage, I thought we'd grown past the stage where either of us would seriously threaten our foundation. The changes in Richard became more pronounced as spring turned into summer. He'd always been casual about his appearance, comfortable in his khakis and polo shirts from the dealership. But suddenly, he was shopping for clothes on his own, coming home with designer jeans and fitted shirts that seemed intended to showcase the results of his new gym membership. The gym itself was another surprise. Richard had never shown interest in working out beyond the occasional weekend bike ride with the kids. Now he was leaving the house at 6 in the morning for hour-long sessions at CrossFit Denver, returning with the satisfied exhaustion of someone who'd pushed their physical limits. When I complimented him on his improved physique, he'd deflect with jokes about wanting to keep up with younger guys at the dealership. His cologne changed too. Gone was the familiar scent of Polo that I'd been buying him for Christmas for 15 years. In its place was something expensive and musky that I didn't recognize. When I asked about it, he mentioned that a customer had recommended it, another throwaway explanation that seemed reasonable enough at the time. The late-night phone calls became a regular occurrence. I'd wake up at 11 or midnight to find his side of the bed empty and the sound of his voice drifting up from the garage below. His tone during these conversations was different, softer, and more intimate than I'd heard him use in years. When I'd ask about them the next morning, he'd explain that a client was dealing with a difficult financing situation or that his manager needed to discuss sales strategies for the next day. Our credit card statements revealed small purchases I couldn't quite place. $20 at a flower shop on a Tuesday afternoon when he'd claimed to be in back-to-back meetings. $45 at a restaurant I'd never heard of, charged during his lunch hour on a day when he told me he was eating at his desk. $57 at Victoria's Secret, which he explained as a surprise he was planning for our upcoming anniversary. The most unsettling change was how distant he'd become during our conversations. Richard had always been chatty about his day, sharing stories about difficult customers or celebrating successful sales. Now his responses to my questions were brief and vague. When I tried to engage him about weekend plans or upcoming family events, he'd seem distracted as if his mind was elsewhere entirely. Our physical relationship suffered too. The easy affection we'd maintained throughout our marriage, the casual touches and spontaneous kisses gradually disappeared. He'd come to bed later than usual and wake up earlier, claiming his new workout schedule required more sleep and earlier mornings. When I'd reach for him in the dark, he'd mumble about being tired or having an early meeting. Friends and family didn't seem to notice these changes during our social gatherings, but I felt like I was living with a stranger. The man who used to tell me everything was now operating with secrets I couldn't penetrate. I found myself analyzing his every word and action, searching for clues to explain this transformation. My rational mind kept offering innocent explanations. Maybe he was planning something special for our 24th anniversary in the fall. Perhaps the pressure at work really was more intense than usual, and he was protecting me from the stress. I'd survived enough years of marriage to know that couples go through periods where they drift apart before finding their way back to each other. But deep down, a cold knot of anxiety was forming in my stomach. The accumulation of small changes was creating a pattern I didn't want to acknowledge, a possibility that felt too devastating to consider seriously. The discovery that changed everything happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon in late July. I needed to retrieve our insurance paperwork from Richard's BMW to update our homeowner's policy, something that should have taken 30 seconds and remained completely forgettable. Instead, I found myself holding a small receipt that made my heart skip several beats. Tiffany & Company, $3,200. The date was from 2 weeks earlier, a day when Richard had claimed to be attending a dealership training seminar in Boulder. I stared at the thin piece of paper, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe it was for me an early anniversary gift or a surprise for my upcoming birthday in September. But the amount seemed excessive for Richard's usual gift giving, and the timing felt strange. I sat in his car for several minutes, rain drumming against the windshield, holding that receipt like it might explode. 23 years of marriage, and Richard had never spent more than $300 on jewelry for any occasion. Our engagement ring had cost $1,500, a sum that had stretched our budget when we were newlyweds living in a tiny apartment. Unable to resist, I called Tiffany's customer service line from my cell phone. I explained that my husband had made a recent purchase, and I wanted to confirm the warranty information for insurance purposes. After providing Richard's name and the transaction date, The helpful representative confirmed that he'd purchased a 1-carat solitaire engagement ring with a custom engraving. My blood turned to ice when she read the inscription, "To my beautiful bride, forever yours are." The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd been Richard's bride 23 years ago. That ring wasn't meant for me. That evening, after Richard came home with another story about working late, I sat at my computer and began a careful examination of our financial records. What I discovered made my hands shake as I scrolled through months of credit card statements and bank transactions. $850 at a bridal boutique called Something White in Cherry Creek, charged on a Saturday when Richard had claimed to be playing golf with his college buddy Tom. $1,200 to Elegant Affairs Catering, listed as a deposit for an event I knew nothing about. $375 to Mile High Flowers for a consultation fee that had been processed on a Wednesday afternoon when Richard was supposedly in sales meetings. The pattern became undeniable as I dug deeper. Charges at rental companies, payments to photographers, and multiple transactions at venues around the Denver area. Someone was planning a wedding, and it wasn't me. I printed every suspicious transaction, organizing them chronologically in a folder that grew thicker with each discovery. The evidence painted a clear picture of elaborate preparation, the kind of detailed planning that takes months of coordination and significant financial investment. But the most chilling realization wasn't just that Richard was planning to marry someone else. It was that he was using our money, our shared assets, that I'd worked decades to build to finance his betrayal. Every dollar spent on another woman's wedding dress and engagement ring was money stolen from our children's college funds and our retirement security. Sleep became impossible that night. I lay next to Richard, listening to his steady breathing, wondering how long this deception had been building. How many lies had I accepted without question? How many times had I unknowingly funded the destruction of my own marriage? Rather than confront Richard immediately, I made what turned out to be the smartest decision of my life. I hired Marcus Thompson, a private investigator who specialized in matrimonial cases. Marcus had 20 years of experience uncovering infidelity, and his calm professionalism helped steady my nerves during our initial meeting. Within a week, Marcus had assembled a comprehensive picture of Richard's double life that was more extensive than I'd imagined possible. Her name was Amanda Foster, 34 years old, blonde and petite, with a bright smile that radiated from the surveillance photos Marcus had taken. She worked as a sales coordinator at Premier Automotive, a luxury car dealership across town that competed directly with Richard's employer. They'd met at an industry networking event 8 months earlier, according to Marcus's investigation into their relationship timeline. Amanda was recently divorced with an 8-year-old daughter named Chloe. She lived in a modest townhouse in Lakewood, driving a leased Toyota that suggested she was struggling financially in the aftermath of her divorce. According to Marcus, Richard had been presenting himself as a successful businessman who was going through his own divorce and would soon be financially free to start a new life. The scope of their wedding plans was breathtaking in its audacity. Richard had reserved the Garden Terrace Resort in Vail for a ceremony scheduled exactly 6 weeks away. The venue cost $8,000 for the weekend, with accommodations for 75 guests who would enjoy a mountain backdrop and gourmet dining experience. Marcus had obtained copies of the guest list, which included Richard's work colleagues, several mutual friends who apparently had no idea he was still married to me, and Amanda's family members, who traveled from various states to attend what they believed would be a legitimate wedding ceremony. The wedding cake had been ordered from Sweet Celebrations, a high-end bakery that specialized in multi-tier designs with handcrafted sugar flowers. The photographer, DJ, and florist had all received deposits, creating a web of vendors who were unknowingly participating in what amounted to bigamy. But perhaps the most infuriating discovery was what Richard had told Amanda about his financial situation. According to Marcus's investigation, Richard had convinced her that he owned significant assets, including half of our house's substantial savings and a thriving investment portfolio. He'd described me as someone who'd taken advantage of him financially during our marriage and suggested that his divorce settlement would result in a windfall that would allow them to live comfortably. Amanda had apparently been planning to quit her job after their honeymoon to focus on being a full-time mother to Chloe and starting a family with Richard. She'd been looking at houses in expensive neighborhoods, believing that Richard's settlement money would allow them to upgrade their lifestyle significantly. The cruelest irony was that Richard had been financing these dreams with money that belonged primarily to me. Our joint credit cards were funding the deposits, our savings account was covering the venue costs, and he'd even taken a cash advance against our home equity line to pay for Amanda's engagement ring. Marcus also discovered that Richard had been secretly consulting with a divorce attorney, trying to understand how to maximize his potential settlement from our marriage. The lawyer had apparently explained that Colorado's equitable distribution laws might entitle him to a significant portion of our assets, especially if he could prove that he contributed to their accumulation. What Richard hadn't told his attorney was that the vast majority of our wealth had been generated through my income and investment expertise. The house was in my name due to my higher credit score when we'd purchased it. The investment portfolio had been built entirely with my salary and bonuses. Even our savings account was technically mine, with Richard added as a secondary holder for convenience. As I read through Marcus's report, a cold rage settled over me. Richard wasn't just cheating on our marriage. He was systematically planning to steal the financial security I'd spent decades building while convincing another woman that he was the victim of an unfair relationship. I chose to confront Richard on a Saturday evening when he returned from what he'd claimed was a client dinner, but which Marcus had confirmed was actually an engagement party that Amanda's friends had thrown for them at an upscale restaurant in downtown Denver. I'd spent the afternoon arranging Marcus's evidence across our kitchen table like a prosecutor preparing for trial. Surveillance photos of Richard and Amanda kissing outside restaurants. Credit card statements with every suspicious charge highlighted in yellow. Copies of vendor contracts for their wedding. The receipt from Tiffany's that had started my investigation. And most damning of all, printed emails that Marcus had obtained showing Richard's correspondence with his divorce attorney about hiding assets and maximizing his settlement. When Richard walked through our front door at 9:30, whistling some song I didn't recognize, I was sitting calmly at the kitchen table with all the evidence spread before me. "We need to talk," I said, simply gesturing to the chair across from me. His face went through a series of expressions as he processed what he was seeing. First confusion, then recognition, followed by panic, and finally a desperate attempt to regain control of the situation. "Elizabeth, I can explain everything," he began, but I held up my hand to stop him. "No," I said. "You're going to sit down and listen while I explain what's going to happen next." His initial strategy was denial, mixed with offense at my investigation. How could I have hired someone to spy on him? Didn't I trust him after all these years? Was this how little faith I had in our marriage? But when I began reading specific details from Marcus's report, including direct quotes from conversations Richard had had with Amanda about their future together, his defensive posture crumbled. "I never meant for you to find out this way," he said, slumping into the chair with his head in his hands. "How exactly did you mean for me to find out?" I asked. "Were you planning to send me an invitation to your wedding?" That's when the painful truth began pouring out. Richard admitted that he'd fallen in love with Amanda and felt like a different person when he was with her. She made him feel young again, he said, like the man he'd been before responsibilities and middle age had worn him down. "Our marriage has been dead for years, Elizabeth," he said, not meeting my eyes. "We've just been going through the motions." The words stung, but what hurt more was his casual dismissal of everything we'd built together. Our children, our home, our shared history, all of it reduced to going through the motions in service of justifying his betrayal. But the conversation that truly shattered any remaining sympathy I might have felt came when I confronted him about the financial deception. Richard actually tried to argue that he deserved half of everything we owned because he'd been a supportive husband who'd allowed me to focus on my career. "I sacrificed my own ambitions so you could succeed," he said with stunning audacity. I'm entitled to share in what we built together. When I pointed out that the vast majority of our assets had come from my income and financial expertise, he became defensive and angry. He'd consulted with an attorney, he said, and Colorado law would protect his interest in our divorce. The most shocking revelation came when I asked about his promises to Amanda regarding money. Richard admitted that he told her he would receive a substantial settlement from our divorce money that would allow them to start their new life together without financial stress. She deserves security, he said. She's been through enough with her divorce. I stared at this man I'd shared a bed with for 23 years, wondering when he'd become someone capable of such calculated deception. He wasn't just leaving me for another woman. He was planning to rob me blind to finance their happiness. Get out of my house, I said with a calmness that surprised us both. Tonight. And don't come back. The next morning, while Richard was presumably explaining to Amanda why he wouldn't be coming home to her that night, I was already 3 steps ahead of him in dismantling his carefully constructed plans. My first call was to Jennifer Walsh, one of Denver's most respected divorce attorneys. Jennifer specialized in high-asset divorces and had a reputation for protecting clients from exactly the kind of financial manipulation Richard had been attempting. By 10 o'clock Monday morning, I had retained her services and begun the process of legally protecting everything I'd worked decades to build. Jennifer moved with impressive speed. By noon, all of our joint accounts were frozen, preventing Richard from accessing funds for his wedding expenses or any other purchases. Our shared credit cards were canceled immediately, and I changed every password and security code on our financial accounts. The locks on our house were changed before Richard finished his workday. When he arrived that evening, expecting to retrieve more of his belongings, he found new deadbolts and a legal notice informing him that he was no longer welcome on the property without prior written consent. But my most strategic move was something Richard never saw coming. I called Amanda directly. I'd wrestled with this decision all morning, uncertain whether confronting the other woman would make me feel better or worse. But ultimately, I realized that Amanda was as much a victim of Richard's deception as I was, just in different ways. The phone rang 3 times before a cheerful voice answered. Amanda Foster speaking. Amanda, this is Elizabeth Morrison. I believe you know my husband, Richard. The silence that followed was longer than I'd expected, filled with the sound of her sharp intake of breath and what might have been a chair scraping against the floor. I think there's been some mistake, she said finally. Richard is divorced. He's been separated for over a year. No, Amanda. Richard and I are still very much married. We live together in the same house, sleep in the same bed, and share joint bank accounts. He's never filed for divorce. What followed was a conversation that lasted nearly an hour, during which Amanda's understanding of her relationship with Richard collapsed as completely as mine had just days earlier. She'd had no idea that Richard was still married and living with me. He'd told her that our divorce had been finalized months ago, that he was just waiting for some paperwork to be completed before he could move on with his life. More devastating for Amanda was learning the truth about Richard's financial situation. He'd convinced her that he was wealthy, that their wedding was being funded by his savings and investment income. She'd quit her job 2 weeks earlier, believing that Richard's post-divorce settlement would allow her to focus on their new family. He told me he owned half of everything, she said, her voice breaking. The house, the investments, all of it. He said his ex-wife had been controlling, but that he'd finally gotten free. I felt genuinely sorry for Amanda as I explained the reality of our financial situation. Richard had no significant assets in his own name. The house, the investments, the savings, all of it was either mine outright or held in joint accounts where I maintained primary control. By the end of our conversation, Amanda had made her own decision about Richard's deception. I'm calling off the wedding, she said. I can't marry someone who's lied to me about everything. The cascade of consequences that followed was swift and merciless. Without access to our joint accounts, Richard couldn't cover the remaining payments for their wedding venue catering or any of the other vendors they'd hired. The deposits he'd already paid were forfeit, representing thousands of dollars in lost money. Amanda contacted every guest who'd already made travel arrangements for the wedding, explaining that it had been canceled due to unforeseen circumstances. Richard's colleagues at the dealership quickly learned about the scandal through the automotive industry's tight-knit network, damaging his professional reputation. Meanwhile, Richard was calling and texting me frantically, trying to negotiate some kind of arrangement that would salvage his situation. He offered to attend marriage counseling, promised to break things off with Amanda completely, and even suggested that we could work out a trial separation that might allow him to explore his feelings while keeping our financial arrangements intact. But I was done being manipulated. Jennifer had helped me understand that Richard's pattern of financial deception could be used to my advantage in divorce proceedings. His attempt to hide assets combined with his use of marital funds for an extramarital relationship put him in a legally vulnerable position. I also discovered that Richard had been lying to his own divorce attorney about our financial situation, providing incomplete information that made his case for a significant settlement much weaker than he'd realized. When his lawyer learned about the frozen accounts and my evidence of financial deception, he advised Richard to consider a settlement that would leave him with far less than he'd been expecting. The man who thought he could manipulate two women and the legal system simultaneously found himself outsmarted by the very person he'd underestimated most, the wife whose financial acumen he dismissed as he planned his exit strategy. The divorce proceedings moved more quickly than anyone expected, largely because Richard's legal position deteriorated with each revelation about his deception. Jennifer presented a compelling case that Richard had committed financial fraud by using marital assets to fund his relationship with Amanda while hiding his intent to leave our marriage. The court awarded me the house, the entire investment portfolio, and the majority of our savings. Richard's attempts to claim alimony based on my higher income were rejected when the judge learned about his systematic deception and misuse of marital funds. In a final twist of irony, Richard was ordered to pay both his attorney fees and mine as compensation for the legal cost his fraud had created. Our children, initially shocked by the sudden dissolution of what they'd perceived as a stable marriage, ultimately supported me once they learned the full extent of their father's betrayal. Sarah, now a senior in college, was particularly angry about how Richard's actions had threatened the security that had allowed her to focus on her education without financial worry. Michael, dealing with his own senior year, struggled more with the family upheaval, but gradually came to understand that his father's choices had made our divorce inevitable. Both kids maintained relationships with Richard, but they also made clear that his actions had fundamentally changed how they viewed him as a person. The months following our divorce were filled with a complex mixture of grief, anger, relief, and gradual healing. I found myself mourning not just the end of my marriage, but the loss of the person I thought Richard was. 23 years of shared memories became tainted with questions about what had been real and what had been performance. Therapy helped me process the betrayal and begin rebuilding my sense of self-worth. Dr. Patricia Hernandez, a counselor who specialized in helping women recover from infidelity, helped me understand that Richard's deception said everything about his character and nothing about my value as a person. I also rediscovered interests and friendships that had been neglected during my years of focusing on family life. My college roommate Lisa, who lived in San Francisco, invited me for a long weekend that turned into a therapeutic exploration of who I was outside of my role as Richard's wife. The most transformative experience came when Sarah suggested that we take a mother-daughter trip to Italy the summer after my divorce was finalized. For 2 weeks, we explored Rome, Florence, and Venice together, wandering through museums and cafes, while I slowly remembered what it felt like to make decisions based purely on my own desires. Standing in the Sistine Chapel surrounded by tourists from around the world, I felt a profound sense of freedom that I hadn't experienced since I was a young woman. The crushing weight of betrayal and legal battles had lifted, replaced by excitement about possibilities I'd forgotten existed. My financial independence, the very thing that had made me a target for Richard's manipulation, became the foundation for a new kind of life. I could travel when I wanted, pursue interests that had been put on hold, and make decisions without having to consider the opinions or needs of someone who'd proven unworthy of that consideration. Richard, meanwhile, struggled to rebuild his life after losing both his marriage and his relationship with Amanda. His reputation in Denver's automotive industry never fully recovered from the scandal, and he eventually relocated to Phoenix, where he took a lower-paying position at a smaller dealership. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd attempted to reconcile with Amanda several months after our divorce was final, but she'd moved on with her life and had no interest in resuming a relationship built on deception. The experience taught me invaluable lessons about the difference between trust and blind faith, between supporting a partner and enabling their worst impulses. I learned that financial independence isn't just about money. It's about maintaining the power to protect yourself when the people closest to you fail to honor their commitments. Most importantly, I discovered reserves of strength and resilience that I'd never had to access before. The woman who'd been devastated by her husband's betrayal evolved into someone who could navigate complex legal challenges, rebuild her social life, and create new dreams for her future. Sometimes, the most painful betrayals lead to the most profound freedom. My marriage to Richard had ended in the most devastating way possible, but it also freed me to become the person I was meant to be, unencumbered by someone else's limitations or deceptions. I learned that the best revenge isn't anger or bitterness. It's living well and staying true to yourself. Richard may have thought he was clever enough to manipulate everyone around him, but he forgot the most important rule of any con: never underestimate your target. Today, I wake up each morning in my beautiful home, surrounded by the security I built through my own hard work and intelligence. I make my coffee exactly the way I like it, plan my days according to my own priorities, and go to sleep each night knowing that no one can steal my peace of mind ever again. The future stretches ahead of me, full of possibilities that belong entirely to me. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. Have you ever discovered that someone close to you wasn't who you thought they were? How do you think you would have handled Richard's betrayal? Please share your experiences in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video if my story resonated with you. Subscribe for more real-life stories of resilience and recovery, and share this video with anyone who might need to hear that they're stronger than they know. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that sometimes the most difficult chapters of our lives lead to the most beautiful new beginnings.